Dave Elswick Show on a Thursday. Power panel has made their way back to their homes. Buddy is still going to hang around here for a while, and the doctor is in after we get done with Senator Tom Cotton, who joins us from Washington, D.C. And, Senator, how are you today?
I'm great, Dave. Good to be on with you as always.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've talked. You've been very busy up there on Capitol Hill dealing with this president who doesn't have a clue about foreign policy and allows the Russians to tell us when we got to fly and when we can't fly and all the rest that's going on.
Yeah, and, I've also been busy, Dave, with my son, who just turned 6 months old.
Wow.
He's very happy, very healthy. But, sometimes, Dave, I get the chance to combine work and family. For instance, my son has reached the age now where we play the game commonly known as peekaboo. But in my household, I call it Surprised by Putin. Because it's a reminder that while it's amusing when a 6-month-old is constantly surprised by the same thing happening over and over again in close succession, it's very dangerous when a president is.
Good one, Tom.
Yeah, that's very, very good. I had on my show yesterday from the Heritage Foundation, Dakota, and Dakota was talking to us about the 2016 military assessment that Heritage has done, and I'm just telling you, we live in a hyper-dangerous world right now, Senator. It is, and it's because America is not standing up and doing what America has always done, and that's lead.
Absolutely, Dave. The world is growing more dangerous every day. If you look around the world, there's virtually no country, ally, or adversary where America's interests are further advanced or where our position is stronger today than it was 7 years ago. In fact, even Jimmy Carter has said that in no place in the world are we stronger today than we were 7 years ago. And you put your finger right on the problem, Dave, is that President Obama has largely retreated from the world and refused to play the long-standing bipartisan role that America has played for the last 70 years to protect Americans and to defend American interests and to uphold a capitalist, constitutional, democratic order around the world. I've had the benefit, because of my work on the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee, to travel around the world to meet with allies in all regions, and in every region, they are all seeking more American leadership. They do not want America to leave their region. They do not want to leave. They do not want them to be left to fend with our adversaries alone.
Well, it was a couple of years ago that I started hearing people always saying, we don't need a big military anymore. Those days of having, a lot of tanks out there and military out there just slugging it out, those days are past. And we started, bringing back, our mechanized divisions and things of that nature. And what happened? The Soviet Union and China looked at that and said, okay, if they're going to do that, we're going to build ours up. I mean, what did Putin do in the Ukraine as soon as he moved in? He brought in tanks.
Yeah, and you're right about that, Dave. And in fact, it's gotten much worse under the Obama administration. For much of the last decade, Russia was still struggling economically. Their military, when it invaded Georgia in 2008, was successful against a small country, but they performed poorly in many ways. Over the last 6 years, though, Vladimir Putin has engaged in a massive military modernization program, and part of that was on display earlier this month when they fired cruise missiles over 900 miles from the Caspian Sea into Syria. Dave, you know that there's no reason to do that. That would have been much more effective and certainly much cheaper to drop those same bombs from a helicopter or from an airplane.
Yep.
They were doing it to display the military modernization they've undertaken, partly as to intimidate the United States and its allies, partly to show Iran and all the other countries in the region the exact kind of wares they have to offer now in the international arms bazaar. And that's all a direct result of America cutting our military and Barack Obama retreating from the world.
Well, we could sit here and talk a whole hour or more just about this, Senator, because I keep up on all of this. Being former military, I spend a lot of time paying attention to what our military is doing. I was in the military when Carter was president. I know what Carter did, and I think Carter honestly just made some stupid mistakes. I don't believe there's any mistakes being made by this president at all. And I think that he is doing exactly what he wants to do, trying to make America a second team player.
And Dave, let's make sure that, so I'm glad you raised that point. Let's make sure that we're fair to President Carter. He had a very flawed foreign policy and defense policy,
Yes,
and
he
it caught
did.
up to us in the end of his administration. But when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in late 1979, Jimmy Carter learned his lesson, and he wised up. He called off his push to ratify SALT II, a very flawed nuclear arms control treaty. He announced the Carter Doctrine that said no power inside or outside the Persian Gulf will be able to dominate the Persian Gulf. He boycotted the Olympics, and he personally signed an emergency spending bill to rebuild our defenses, so Ronald Reagan a year later didn't have to start from a standing stop. Jimmy Carter learned from his mistakes, and you're absolutely right that this president does not learn from his mistakes or may not even realize that he's making mistakes.
Well, I think
He doesn't
I don't
care.
think
He doesn't care.
I think you're right, buddy. I don't think he cares.
Well,
I think it's a legitimate move on his part to take the United States down a few notches.
Well, if you look at what's going to happen tomorrow in Vienna, where Iran and Russia, two mortal enemies of the United States and our interests and our allies around the world, have now been invited to Vienna to negotiate about the future of Syria. Remember, when this president was advocating for his Iran nuclear deal, he promised us all that if it wasn't blocked, then he would begin to confront Iran and their nefarious activities throughout the Middle East. I guess we now know that confrontation, in his book, involves inviting Iran to Vienna to eat strudel. I mean, I'd hate to see what appeasement looks like. I mean, maybe it's inviting them to Munich to eat strudel, which would only be historically fitting.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, let me move back to domestic policies, because that's what I had asked to talk about. I wanted to talk about what you're doing with Social Security and disability insurance. That part of Social Security has been racked with all kinds of fraud, waste, and abuse. It's being misused by a lot of people. What are some things that you found out? What are some things that you're suggesting be done?
Well, Dave, thanks very much. The Social Security Disability Program Support Program provides assistance for people who truly cannot work because they have terrible diseases like ALS, for instance. However, you're right that it's riddled with abuse and fraud and just mismanagement. Some of the work I've done is to try to reform the program to encourage people to return to work. To give you just one figure, in the 1980s, about 6% of people who started on disability ultimately left and went back to work. Now, less than 0.5% of all Americans return to work once they get on the program. And that's not what our social safety net is designed to do. It's designed to help people when they fall, when they need help, or if they're permanently disabled and truly can't work for themselves. But in the long run, it's designed to get them back on their feet, get them back in the workforce, give them the dignity of providing for themselves and their families, and also be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. So I've introduced legislation that would sort out people based on the severity of their disability. If they're able to return to work, help get them training and rehabilitative counseling and give them some incentives to get back to work. Unfortunately, the budget deal goes in the wrong direction, and that's one reason why I'll be voting no on it later tonight. It just takes money out of the old age portion of Social Security and gives it straight to the disability program with no genuine reforms. So I'm very worried about that element of the budget deal, but I'm going to keep working to try to reform disability because I know how many Arkansans depend on that program, but also know how many see the abuses in that program.
Yeah, and, you know, the other thing that has become a problem is judges that are forcing states that put people back on disability when they take them off of disability. It's like the states now have got to fight the judicial system as well.
Yeah, that's right, Dave. There's also a real problem with judges within the Social Security Administration who are essentially rubber stamps for disability claims, whether they're new claims or renewal claims. And in fact, you know, there's a real problem with our legal system as a whole. We've got unscrupulous doctors or lawyers who are gaming the system and submitting evidence that is far from what's required under the law to help put people on disability inappropriately. And again, what we've got to do is the program has very limited resources. It's running out of money next year. That's why this budget deal, wrongly in my opinion, transfers money from the old age part of Social Security to the disability part. But in the end, it would be much stronger financially if people weren't added to the system inappropriately, if they were encouraged to leave the system and get back to work when they could get back to work, we'd be able to focus those resources on the people who truly need it, the people who are truly disabled permanently, who can't get a job in our economy today.
Well, it makes me feel good that I know that our senators and our congressmen, I do know two, I had them on today in French Hill and Bruce Westerman, they both voted against the budget. You're voting against it. I'm assuming John Bozeman will vote against it. We got some real conservatives that are up in Congress, and you guys are trying to do it right, but you're going to need a president who's a Republican to get it done correctly. Is that not true?
Well, Dave, that gets to the root of the problem. I am opposing this particular deal because I just think it's a bad deal. We could have done better, even with Barack Obama as president. I would have been able to vote yes if certain things were changed in the deal, but too often we get backed into this corner at the last minute where we get a bill that was written in secret, dumped on us. It's very complicated and deals with trillions of dollars, and the pitch is either vote yes or the sky is going to fall. Well, every time you do that, it just encourages it to happen again. But in the long run, the way to avoid this problem and the way to pass good law that addresses our debt problem, that gets our economy growing again, that doesn't have unnecessary and unwise additional provisions like these disability provisions we've discussed, is to get a Republican president. And that's so critical. After 8 years of the Obama administration, we cannot afford another 4 years of Hillary Clinton or even Bernie Sanders heaven forfend.
No doubt. Hey, before I let you go, cybersecurity, what's happening on that end?
Well, obviously, our nation is not ready from a cybersecurity standpoint. We've had massive breaches in the last year. They're well publicized. Federal officials from the Office of Personnel Management to include defense and intelligence professionals, the hacks at Sony Pictures last year by the North Koreans, and a lot of hacks at major retailers, places like Target and Home Depot. One of the reasons why we're not prepared for these kind of attacks is private companies are reluctant to cooperate with the federal government for fear of frivolous lawsuits. And remember, these companies have been the victim of attacks. They are a victim just as much as someone else is, just as much as if their store had been robbed by someone wearing a mask and carrying a gun. So this bill turns that assumption on its head. It says if you come and cooperate with federal law enforcement officials and security officials, you can't be sued for what happened to you, because what we really need to do is to encourage private sector companies, just like we would in traditional law enforcement threats, to come and cooperate with the government so the government knows what's happening, so it can connect the dots, so it can see the threats that our computer systems all around the country face. It's urgent that we pass this legislation before we have the equivalent of a cyber 9/11.
All right, well, you keep doing the good work that you've been doing up there, Senator. We'll keep talking to you from time to time and let you bring us up to date. You have a great afternoon and a wonderful evening tonight.
Great, Dave. Same to all of you, and happy Halloween.
Thanks,
Same to you
Tom.
now. We'll talk to you later. Senator Tom Cotton here on the Dave Elswick Show. Don't forget about my good friends at Fairway.